The symbolism of the Narcissus, Daffodil and Jonquil, and the story of Narcissus. Narcissus is the family name for daffodils, jonquils, and plants that are just called Narcissus. All daffodils are members of the genus Narcissus, as are all jonquils. And the name Narcissus covers over 13,000 hybrids. There are ways of knowing whether the flower is a jonquil, daffodil or narcissus. For example, jonquils have slender leaves that round on the tips, while daffodils sport slim, sword-tipped foliage. Jonquil stems are hollow and usually shorter than daffodil varieties. They tend to have clusters of flowers on the stems and a delicate fragrance. Additionally, jonquils only grow in yellow hues, whilst daffodils may be found in white, peach, pink, and a variety of other colours. But all this becomes irrelevant when we look at its symbolism. In Greek mythology, Narcissus was a hunter from Thespiae in Boeotia, who was known for his great beauty. He rejected all romantic advances, falling in love with his own reflection in a pool of water. After he died, in his place sprouted the flower bearing his name. Narcissism. The character of Narcissus is the origin of the term narcissism, a fixation with oneself. Wikipedia. Narcissism is the pursuit of gratification from vanity or egotistic admiration of one's idealized self-image and attributes. And from this interpretation of the story, a great raft of psychological disorders has been created, one of which is narcissistic personality disorder, a condition marked by grandiosity, excessive need for admiration, and an inability to empathise. And indeed this exists, needs attention, and its recognition has been useful. But this isn't what the story of Narcissus is actually about. Ovid's Metamorphosis. Several versions of the myth have survived from ancient sources, but the classic version is by Ovid, found in Book 3 of his Metamorphoses. This is the story of Echo and Narcissus. When Liriope gave birth to Narcissus, she consulted the seer Tiresias, the tender dame solicitous to know whether her child should reach old age or no, consults the sage Tiresias, who replies, "If ere he knows himself, he surely dies." Now there is a key admonition given to all on the spiritual path, and that is to know thyself. And ultimately those who do succeed in knowing themselves do die in a sense. The personality, the mask they have been given for this reincarnation cycle, see Personality and the Mask, falls away and they become an immortal soul, a living God. In other words, the story is about a mortal boy who becomes an immortal, but the transition annihilates his personality, and he dies. Exactly the same symbolism is employed in that of the butterfly and chrysalis, pupa. See our video. The caterpillar metamorphoses into a chrysalis until eventually it becomes a butterfly, an immortal but fragile, fluttering creature, totally unlike the caterpillar, egg, or pupa from which it came. And the transition is painful, as the creature not only changes into a god, but also changes its shape as well. It is no accident that the story uses the Narcissus, a golden flower of spring, to explain the change. The end of the spiritual path is dawn and spring. The story also incorporates the symbol of the mirror, of which more in a moment. The beginning of the story in brief. Narcissus reaches 16 without event, pursued by nymphs, but rejecting them all. Meanwhile, Echo had been cursed by Juno, Hera, for protecting Zeus, by diverting Zeus's wife with stories until Zeus had escaped before being caught nymph-handed. Full often when the goddess might have caught Jove and her rivals in the very fault, this nymph with subtle stories would delay her coming till the lovers slipped away. So Juno removed Echo's storytelling ability until she could only echo the last sentence of someone else, and when she saw Narcissus, she too became besotted, but couldn't tell him. So Narcissus was unwittingly the cause of unrequited love in numerous nymphs, and Echo eventually pined away completely, unable to talk to him. But Narcissus was oblivious to the broken hearts he had left behind him, and carried on regardless, leaving great trails of weeping nymphs until one of the nymphs sought revenge for being rejected. Oh, may he love like me, and love like me in vain. And a goddess answered her prayers, which was just a dash unfair, because he wasn't trying to be irresistible, he just was. He finds the fateful pool. Ovid's Metamorphosis. There stands a fountain in a darksome wood, nor stained with falling leaves nor rising mud. Untroubled by the breath of winds it rests, unsullied by the touch of men or beasts. High bowers of shady trees above it grow, and rising grass and cheerful greens below. Pleased with the form and coolness of the place, and overheated by the morning chase, Narcissus on the grassy verdure lies. But whilst within the crystal fount he tries to quench his heat, he feels new heats arise. For as his own bright image he surveyed, he fell in love with the fantastic shade, and o'er the fair resemblance hung unmoved, nor knew fond youth it was himself he loved. The well-turned neck and shoulders he descries, the spacious forehead and the sparkling eyes, the hands that Bacchus might not scorn to show, and hair that round Apollo's head might flow, with all the purple youthfulness of face that gently blushes in the watery glass. By his own flames consumed the lover lies, and gives himself the wound by which he dies. To the cold water oft he joins his lips, oft catching at the beauteous shade he dips his arms, as often from himself he slips. Nor knows he who it is his arms pursue, with eager clasps, but loves he knows not who. The pool acts as the mirror, and he knows himself. And thus by knowing himself through the mirror-like surface of the pond, the prophecy of the seer is fulfilled. And he, not before a great deal of anguish has been caused, dies. At length he raised his head and thus began to vent his griefs and tell the woods his pain. You trees, says he, and thou surrounding grove, who oft have been the kindly scenes of love, tell me, if e'er within your shades did lie a youth so tortured, so perplexed as I. And the pain is so much more because this loved image seems so close, but appears unreachable. In such a maze of love my thoughts are lost, and yet no bulwark town or distant coast preserves the beauteous youth from being seen. No mountains rise, nor oceans flow between. A shallow water hinders my embrace, and yet the lovely mimic wears a face that kindly smiles, and when I bend to join my lips to his, he fondly bends to mine. Whene'er I stoop, he offers at a kiss, and when my arms I stretch, he stretches his. His eye with pleasure on my face he keeps. He smiles my smiles, and when I weep, he weeps. Whene'er I speak, his moving lips appear to utter something which I cannot hear. Eventually he realizes he is viewing himself. He has indeed known himself, and his fate is sealed. Ah, wretched me, I now begin too late to find out all the long perplexed deceit. It is myself I love, myself I see. The gay delusion is a part of me. Ah, how gladly would I from myself remove, and at a distance set the thing I love. My breast is warmed with such unusual fire. I wish him absent whom I most desire. And now I faint with grief, my fate draws nigh. In all the pride of blooming youth, I die. But as he dies, something quite extraordinary happens. As wax dissolves, as ice begins to run, and trickle into drops before the sun, so melts the youth, and languishes away. His beauty withers, and his limbs decay, and none of those attractive charms remain, to which the slighted echo sued in vain. And when the Naiads and the Dryads look for whatever is left, they find he has metamorphosed into a flower of spring. And now the sister nymphs prepare his urn. When looking for his corpse, they only found a rising stalk with yellow blossoms crowned. Puns, mirrors, and liminality. Liminality was once an anthropological term. It was first used by Arnold van Gennep to describe what happens during rites of passage. As van Gennep first observed, all rites of passage have a three-part structure. Separation, a liminal period, reassimilation. The term liminal thus relates to the transitional stage of a process. It is that uncanny place, space, or experience that lies betwixt and between, neither here nor there, and yet remains all the more potent and attractive for it. And the mirror is the symbol used to describe that point, the threshold. Latin, limen, meaning threshold or door, that separates the spiritual from the material. So Narcissus suddenly saw the beauty in the spiritual world by seeing himself. He knew himself. And once he knew himself, he was destined to transition. Move from the material to the spiritual. Although boundaries keep us safe, they also constrain and restrain us. Narcissus was destined to become a god, and thus had to die to himself. And so he passed over, made the transition. All mystic societies once understood this. The Celts, for example, were able to pinpoint both transitional times and places. For them, the liminal marked the boundaries between heaven and earth, the mundane and the spiritual. Dusk, dawn, twilight, when the borders dissolve and mix. The time to talk to the spirits. The Celts also identified specific places where the boundaries between the spirit world and the physical world are less delineated and more permeable. Lewis Carroll captured this perfectly when he showed Alice climbing through the mirror to enter the realm of spirit. These sacred places still exist and are remembered by a sacred geography. The shore, wells, volcanoes, caves, mountains and crossroads, once thought to be some of the most magical and liminal places around. As such, the liminal not only represents transition and change, but it is the very process and act of change itself. In order to change, we must leave the familiar behind and enter liminal territory. Be neither here nor there in order to get somewhere, and it is why Ovid called his book Metamorphoses. As such, the transition from a mortal to an immortal feels a little like being Schrödinger's cat. The future god is both dead and alive at the same time. It seems absurd and paradoxical, but only because of the strange way in which we view death. Death is a transition, not an ending. And maybe what ascends is the immortal soul, and what remains on earth is a beautiful legacy for all to enjoy. John 20:17. And Mary Magdalene turned herself back and saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. And Jesus saith unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? She, supposing him to be the gardener, saith unto him, Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. And Jesus saith unto her, Mary. She turned herself, and saith unto him, Master. Jesus saith unto her, Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended